G'day viewers, my name is Dave Lonergan, Arctic Film Productions. If you're a returning viewer, thank you. And if you're a new viewer, please press subscribe, press the like button or dislike, whatever you want. Now, Jakarta, Indonesia, what a fascinating place. I've travelled from Australia back to Jakarta quite a few times, and it really is an interesting city. It's got a massive problem. The city is sinking into the alluvial soils in which it was formed from groundwater extraction, because only 40% of the actual city has piped water supply. The other 60% rely on groundwater, bore water. So they're basically drawing water out of underground to use for drinking, bathing, cooking, showering, whatever, industry as well. So what that means is that it's alluvial floodplains, the entire area. It's actually compressing and compressing and compressing. Some parts of the city have sunk since the 1970s up to 4 metres. Now that is absolutely staggering. When you're in North Jakarta, this region up here at the top where the blue area is, you can stand at the seawall and you can see the sea levels here and then the street levels down there, and it's not too hard to work out, well, this is a huge problem going forward, because we all know the sea levels are slowly increasing. At some point they'll probably speed up at the increase, because you've got that saltwater intrusion into the ice shelf in north and south. That's another show. Jakarta, population 31.5 million in the entire region, outlying all the way through. Now, if you look at this chart here again, this is the year 2100. This entire region shown here in blue, North Jakarta, will basically be the ocean. Now, they are building seawalls along quite a few sections in North Jakarta, which I'll show you shortly. But you just sort of got to think, is this actually going to work? Groundwater extraction, sea level rise, massive problem for the huge population. Where do they go? They are building a new city, Nusantara, over in Borneo, which is about 1,000 kilometres away from the city of Jakarta. But that's only going to house about 2.5, maybe 3 million people. Now, there's already 31 million here. So I just think, well, who's going to Nusantara? Now, when you talk to the people in the street and you ask them what they think about the situation, they all sort of like, well, what about us? It's a fascinating place. I spent quite a bit of time there talking to folks in the street and just, getting a lot of knowledge of what's actually happening. The drinking water supply situation is something that actually, it's almost like the problem's just been passed down to government, and it's never really been addressed, which is why the ground is sinking, because of groundwater extraction. And you've got sea level rise, so you've got two massive problems there. Looking at what's happening on the ground is pretty interesting. Let's go and have a look. So, come with me. Here we are on one of the many seawalls on the outskirts of northern Jakarta, and you can see to my right the encroaching ocean, which is only encroaching further with the increase in sea level. Now, if you look across to my left, in the distance there, you can see these cars parked at street level. They're a good, 3 feet to a metre below sea level at low tide. So at high tide, you can see markers on this wall, it's going to go up another half a metre. Now, the area we just drove through before we positioned ourselves here in the markets is lower again. There's another metre below the ground level right here. So this is 1.5 metres to 1 to 2 metres below ocean level at low tide. So from a long-term perspective, you have to wonder, what is the future of this entire area of North Jakarta, where, let's face it, millions of people live. The population of Jakarta Central is 11 million. When you include the outlying suburbs, the residential suburbs, industry, 32 million people. Now, 40% of Jakarta is already below sea level at this point in 2024. That's only going to worsen as the years go on. You also have the coupling problem of the extraction of groundwater as their primary source of water supply in Jakarta. The entire city is gradually sinking. Jakarta is the most rapidly sinking city on our planet. Now, that's a problem handed down from previous governments and handed across. Back in 1619, when Jakarta was colonised by the Dutch, the population was 80,000. Now it's 31 million. There's over a dozen rivers converging through the Delta Plains, which have now become the city of Jakarta. So alluvial soil plains, they compress over time. As the city has expanded, concrete, asphalt, very little green space. You basically sealed that off. So any rainfall, and they get plenty of rainfall here, believe you, any rainfall does not actually get to replenish that aquifer. And there's 31 million people in this city. I think it's 48% have water supply, the rest don't. So they're extracting water, groundwater, from the artesian water basin, and then the ground compresses, and then you've got the problem with sea level rise. You can see where this is all headed. Now, the current government of Indonesia has already started building a new capital on the island of Borneo, where they're going to relocate 2 to 2.5 million people. The city's costing to date about $45 billion US. How that's being funded is a little bit questionable. And what do you do with the other 30 odd million people in Jakarta? Where are they going to go? These seawalls, and they're everywhere, there's a massive project in play to build these seawalls up, but the ground is not stable. So a lot of the seawalls are actually collapsing, they're cracking, the water's getting through, you get high tide. If you get a decent storm here, the water's coming over the walls, flooding these low-lying residential areas, flooding the markets, flooding areas where people live, flooding their business, their industry. I just sort of wander around and I just think, wow, it's so clearly obvious when you stand on a wall and you look at the ocean level at low tide, you look at the street level, there's 90 centimetres, a metre to play with, tide comes up, they're 1.5 metres below. You go a bit further down into central northern Jakarta and it's lower again. You can sense when you're walking through that the areas are very low lying, and you can see lines through some of these alleyways and buildings where the storm surges have come through and flooded up to over my head height, and then the water dissipates away. The problem is the people here have nowhere to go. Where are they going to go? There's no second city for the bulk of these people. Yes, they're building a new capital, but the bulk of the population will remain here, and this problem is not going to go away. I'll be interested to see over the next 20, 25 years, 30 years, what the governments can do to alleviate this issue. But the more you look at it, the more you study, and you just think it's almost insurmountable how this problem is going to be addressed as the years go on. And these are lovely people. I've been here a number of times, and the happiest people on the bloody planet. And you just think, wow, do they know what's coming? They do, but I guess what can they do? So here we are in North Jakarta again, and you can see directly behind me the Java Sea. This is a fishing port, so obviously a lot of fishermen here, but just look at the size of this seawall that I'm standing on. It is absolutely massive. Now, these seawalls are built obviously to last a lifetime, and that's what they need to do, because the community down below is basically at sea level, and this is low tide. So high tide, these street levels are once again already 0.5 metre below sea level. Now, as time goes on, do they heighten these walls? What do they do? Interesting. Huge amount of people work here in a lot of these places that we go to. Over and over again, we're seeing the same thing. Massive seawalls to hold back the ocean, but you've still got the same problem with the depletion of groundwater and the sinking land behind you. And some of the world's noisy about it. And another thing you really want to think about, well, something I've been thinking about quite a bit, is the water supply situation in North Jakarta. See, back in the 1800s, the Dutch section of North Jakarta, of course, they installed a massive piped water infrastructure system for their own communities, but they neglected to do it for the Indonesian community. So you have this quite interesting situation where a lot of the now wealthy areas of North Jakarta have piped water, water supply, town water, and a lot of the other regions, residential areas, the markets, and the lower income regions basically, where the Indonesians live, they're reliant on groundwater. So there's a huge discrepancy between the two water supplies. Now, I don't know how they're going to they were talking about putting in a pipe water supply. These people are bloody tough, I'm telling you. It's just a great place to be, a great thing to experience, to come here and, just to witness this community working and eating and sleeping. And it's just like, not that I watch them sleeping, but it's just, you know what I mean. It's just really, really quite fascinating to come here. It's like section of the seawall right here. I had a look over the other side. The ocean level at low tide is about here. So 0.5 metre above the ground I'm standing on. The next lane across is another 0.5 metre drop further down that street in that direction, It's another half metre lower yet again. So at low tide, those streets are 1.5 metres below sea level. That's a bit of an issue long term. Now, we're going to wander around to the markets where it's pretty interesting, thousands of people live. But this channel here, you look at it, I've been here at high tide, the seawater is just running through here because there's walls, there's a lot of leaky sections in these walls. So they go down to a channel, go down to a pit, they pump the water back over into the ocean. But how long can you pump back the Java Sea? I don't know. North Jakarta markets. These are the food markets for, you know, the locals, the residents. This whole area is only just above sea level, and as time goes on with the increasing sea level we're getting globally and the depletion of groundwater in Jakarta, these ground areas are sinking. I'm in North Jakarta now. You have to look around and you realise that these people maybe have 10 years, 15 years before this whole area, they're going to be knee deep in the ocean. And it's staggering to think that where do these people go? What do they do? Their livelihoods are here, they live here, they work here, they play here. You know, they've been here for generations. And as we have our heavy reliance on coal, oil and gas, we keep pumping carbon dioxide into the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, heating up the air, we're heating up the oceans. Salt water expands when it gets warm, that's just what it does. So if you heat up the ocean, the salt water expands right across the globe, but in the Pacific region, equatorial regions like here, it's affected more because the ocean's already warm. It's pretty obvious. So that's where you get these tidal surges, you get these increase in storm surges right across the equatorial region, impacts these low-lying areas like Jakarta, like Bangladesh, like Marshall Islands, like Fiji. It's just, you know, staggering that we stagger around and do very little about it when these people here have done nothing wrong other than work and eat and sleep their bloody lives away, work their lives away, I mean. You know, you just think, they're not causing this problem, they're just making an existence here. I don't know, I think it's bloody terrible. Our reliance on fossil fuels is not going away as our population increases. We're gradually getting into renewables, sure, but the transition is so slow, it's going to take hundreds of years, and I'm telling you, North Jakarta does not have hundreds of years to battle this out. You can't stop the Java Sea from flooding into North Jakarta. Another interesting thing to think about in these regions, in North Jakarta, and Jakarta generally, in any of these low-lying areas right across the Pacific, right across the whole planet actually, is that as the sea level increases, you're going to have this loss of living environment, loss of culture, loss of homeland, loss of, well, their very existence is going to change. As the years go on, everything's going to change for these people in biblical proportions. And it's really quite scary to walk around knowing an uncertain future is right in front of you. Now, you'd have to be a village idiot to think that the sea levels aren't coming up. And it doesn't really matter why sea levels are coming up. If you don't believe in climate change, well, great. You're one of the 5% of people that don't. The other 95% know it's happening, and it is happening. But the fundamental issue is sea levels are increasing at an alarming rate, not just here, but right across the entire globe. And it's not that it's going to happen in 10 years, it's already coming. I feel right across the planet, and I can tell you, from what I've seen, it's already here, it's already happening, it's already changing. It's a bloody ticking time bomb. And the more I look at, the more I see, the more information I get sent from climatologists, oceanographers, right around the world, and everyone's saying the same thing. You've got melting glaciers, you've got the depletion of the ice cap in the Arctic, so you're losing that reflective ability to bounce back solar radiation back into space. During the summer months, the ice around the Arctic is getting smaller and smaller, and then you've got this massive ice melt in the Antarctic, which is only pushing more fresh water into the ocean. So it's changing the very ocean itself in so many ways. The climate's changing in so many ways, it's staggering. Areas like this are going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. Rainfall's going to get higher in some areas, it's going to be drier in other areas. We've disrupted the entire natural cycle of our own weather by greenhouse gas emissions, coal, oil and gas. Why we're still relying on that in 2024 is a little bit scary, but I can tell you why, because it's cheaper than renewables, and coal, oil and gas are a known quantity. They have the processes in plant already in play to generate electricity that way, and getting them to change over is only going to happen if you and me, people on the street, put our arms up and say, we've had enough, let's get off fossil fuels. It's going to take a long time, but it has to happen. Otherwise, regions like this, they have no future. And where do they go? You know? And another thing, this is the street. I'm telling you, I've been here, it hasn't rained for weeks. There are fish in here. How do you think the fish get into the water on the streets? The fish come from the oceans through the channels. These streets used to drain into the ocean. Now the ocean drains into the street. So that problem of flooding in streets, in areas like this, residential streets, it's coming back in from where it used to once go out to drain the land into the ocean. Now the ocean's draining into the land. One of the very, so many places like this. You've got this canal draining Jakarta, the residential areas built right up to the edge of the canal. Now, years and years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, all these areas were covered with mangrove swamps. But as the years went on, the city expanded, of course, as population grew. The mangrove swamps got culled, residential expanded right out, right to the edge of the water. They built these walls, you know, and then basically built right to the edge of the water. So, of course, it creates a bit of a problem because that water used to spread a lot further out across the alluvial plains, but now it basically can't because it's channeled in these small channels. So heavy rain, you know, massive downfall, storms, these areas flood up so quickly. And where do they flood? Straight into these residential areas. That's why many of them you'll see with these almost temporary Besser block walls along the edge of these canals to hold the water back. But quite often it's up to here, and it's up 2 metres high, all the way through, making its way out to the Java Sea. But the impact on the residential areas is just absolutely staggering. And when you go inside a lot of these buildings, you can see high tide marks, mouldy walls, because the water stays in the building for weeks and weeks and weeks, penetrates into the brickwork, comes out through the paintwork, and you can see lines through these houses when you go through them. In these areas, a lot of other areas I've been into, where they've just been flooded over and over again. There's just a continuation of flooding right through North Jakarta. It's only going to get worse as time goes on. It's just insurmountable. There is a bit of a theory that if they replant a lot of the mangrove swamps on the Java coast, that will hold back those storm surges, but that's sort of in its infancy at the moment. It's been trialled overseas with great success. Whether the Indonesian government adopts that policy here is a wait and see attitude. In the meantime, these people are stuck with that uncertainty of where they are and what's going to happen every time you get a huge downpour. Are they going to get flooded? Are they not? I've been in here in heavy rains and they're going to get flooded. And then, of course, right behind me, this huge stadium. So there's this huge variation of what the government's spending the money on, massive sports stadiums. Meanwhile, we've got this huge problem all through these residential areas where millions of people live. I'm very close to Ancol Beach, and directly behind me is another canal which feeds straight through the city of Jakarta into the Java Sea. Now look at this huge residential complex. They have a sewage pump station just here at the side of the street, which takes the sewage from this residential building and a lot of others and pumps it straight into this canal. A lot of these canals feed all the way through Jakarta, and they're taking a lot of sewage from a lot of the residential areas, and they basically feeds it straight into the Java Sea. Whether that's a great solution or not, well, that's up to you to think about. And interestingly also, a lot of people fish out of these same canals. You see a lot of fishermen, and you see a lot of council workers cleaning up rubbish in these same canals, and you've got a pretty fair idea what's in those canals. And I've seen people collecting bottles and stuff to resell for recycling in the same canals that they're pumping the sewage into, flowing all the way through the city. And directly behind me is one of the many control gates that we see around North Jakarta at the connection point between the canal and the Java Sea. It's to regulate the flow of water which is flowing out through the city, through the canals, which once were rivers and have now been basically formed into channeled canals. That's another problem we'll talk about later. And this gateway system on each of these canals is regulating the flow of water coming through the city to get out to the Java Sea, which is also carrying sewage from many parts of the city to flush it through into the ocean. And as you have the increasing height in ocean level, you can imagine there's a bit of a problem. You keep rebuilding these gates as the water level comes up of the ocean. You still have to drain the canal system out of the city continuously, well, basically forever. Interesting times. When this wall was built?
When?
When they built this wall?
Oh yeah.
How long ago?
Dia nanya, kapan ini dibuat? 6 bulan yang lalu. It was built in 6 months ago.
6 months ago? Wow, only 6 months ago. Huge construction.
Yeah. He said a long time ago it's usually just like flood before it
was flooding.
flooding. Yeah,
it was flooding before the wall.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're seeing everywhere. Huge walls going up to stop the flooding of the city. Wow, government funded.
It was lucky, government built this.
Yeah. Well, they'll have to continue building more all the way through, won't they? Yeah, to protect these communities from sea level rise. Fascinating. Another impact that's happened in North Jakarta is obviously as the population's increased, is the overfishing in the Java Sea. So a lot of these guys now are finding the amount of time they can go fishing is reduced. The weeks that they can go fishing is reduced because there's less fish in the ocean because, well, there's more fishing boats than what there was, say, 10 years ago, because the population's increased. So it's another impact of it, an expanding city. As Jakarta's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 31 million now, Jakarta and the outlying areas. In 5 years' time, it's projected to be 35 million. So because they're coming in from outlying regions into Jakarta looking for work, and then there's almost like an oversupply of labour, a real struggle for them to get by because everything is changing. It's just a fascinating place. One of the
I net drink.
I'm David. Yeah. In one of the many canals all the way through North Jakarta, the council clean-up, the government clean-up just goes on and on and on. As you can see, it's just an endless process of keeping these waterways clean that eventually end up in the ocean. So these guys are doing a fabulous job, and wherever you go, you just see this happening over and over again because it's a huge problem with such a massive population and such a massive a pollution problem, basically, in the market regions. And all you see is people working, eating, sleeping, playing. I tell you what, these people work like you wouldn't bloody believe. They're like, I don't know, Trojan horses. They don't stop. They just keep working. Now, interestingly, all these areas, you can work out the mathematics as much as you want. These areas are going to be overrun with seawater in about 15 years. So all these market regions are going to disappear. These people have been here for generations, have worked, lived here for hundreds of years. They're going to be displaced, like so many people in other countries right across the Pacific region is going to be more affected than anyone anywhere else. And it's really concerning to think that where do they go? What are they going to do? Their culture's here, their history's here, their family's here, they work here, they live here. These people in these streets here that I'm talking to and I'm listening to, they're not the ones responsible for the over-expansive use of coal, oil and gas, primary energy resource right across the planet. Why are we still doing it when we know the consequences? It's just absolute bloody insanity to think that we're not harnessing the sun. It's up there, and I'll tell you, it's bloody free. So why aren't we using that? 80% of our power generation should be from the sun. But the transition to renewables is so bloody slow. By the time we get there, in another 100, 150 years, it's going to be too late for a lot of these regions around here, everywhere across the planet. And, I've recorded and I've filmed places you wouldn't bloody believe. And I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. And the more people I talk to, the more information I get fed about what's happening with the Arctic and the Antarctic. The acceleration of the ice melt, sea level rise is coming. It's already here. These regions are going to be very heavily affected. And Jakarta has another major issue with the depletion of groundwater. So, the whole city's sinking. 40%, as I said, over and over again. I won't stop saying it. 40% of the city is already below sea level. In 15 years, what's going to happen to, 5 million people. What are you going to do with 5 million people? Where are they going to go? Another one of the very expansive residential areas in North Jakarta. And of course you've got major railway infrastructure coming right through these cities. The train lines are everywhere. Sea levels are coming up. What do you do with the infrastructure for train lines, ports, buildings, businesses, people's lives? What do you do with all this development that's going to be so heavily impacted in the years to come by increasing sea level? It's a huge problem. It's coming straight at Jakarta. It's coming straight at so many cities across the world. And you have to ask, what are we going to do about it long term? This heavy reliance on coal, oil and gas, absolute insanity when you think millions of people's lives are going to be impacted. Well, they already are. I keep saying it over and over again. Why are we still so keen on oil, gas and coal? It's just crazy, you know. Around Jakarta, there's 10 coal-fired power stations. That's their whole electricity generation system. So they're adding to the problem, yes, but Jakarta already 40%, and I keep saying it over and over again, 40% of land mass in Jakarta is already below sea level. So sea levels are going up, whether you believe it because it's greenhouse gases or not, it doesn't really matter. Sea levels are going up. Areas like this, and like in so many other places around the world, are going to be so heavily impacted. Not in, you know, like 3 years. It's just coming non-stop. It's going to be a huge problem. Our weather patterns are changing. Everything's changing. Massive melt in the Arctic and the Antarctic. An endless bloody problem. And it's caused by us, our heavy reliance on fossil fuels. It's caused by humanity. But we have the technology to change. Why aren't we changing? Why are we endangering these people's lives here and everywhere? It does my bloody head in as to why we just sit on